Thank you very much, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to be here with you. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's like 110 degrees all the time. We are just getting hit by Hurricane Debbie, and I woke up this morning in Geneseo, where I grew up, and it was like 62 degrees and perfect, and couldn't be happier to be up here for a few days. So thanks for the introduction, Stephanie. And yeah, I'm the Soybean Extension Specialist at NC State University now. My husband works with tobacco, and there's not much of that in the Midwest, so we're happy in North Carolina. But I also lead the National Science for Success initiative. And when Stephanie invited me to come up here to speak, she wanted me to emphasize some areas where growers could potentially save money in light of these lower commodity prices. And Science for Success has generated a lot of research that's data-driven, or facilitates data-driven decision-making on a variety of topics that I'm going to cover this morning. So glad to be here. When you look at this photo, who would you be cheering for? These are some classic land-grant matchups.
Illinois.
Okay, yes, I did give this presentation to USB, where there was a lot of people from all over the US. I figured a lot of people would say Illini. I thought we might have some Purdue fans in here. And a couple, just raise your hand, nothing to be ashamed of. I'd be going to Illini too. I'm an alum, and also the Wolf Pack, where I work now at NC State. But the point is, when you look at these pictures, you're thinking about these land-grant institutions as competitors. But what if you thought about all the land-grant institutions working together alongside state-level soybean boards like the Illinois Soybean Association and the United Soybean Board to deliver best management practices to U.S. soybean farmers? That is exactly what Science for Success is. We are the A-team of all these universities working together to provide best management practices. This is a picture of our group in Charlotte last year. I want to emphasize that Giovanni Prezafontes, who is the grain specialist at the University of Illinois, is involved now, but also Dr. Emerson Nafziger was involved with Science for Success from the very beginning, and I think was an integral part in sort of elevating our ability to deliver research-based knowledge, always challenged us to do the best that we could do. So this is what our group looks like now. There's about 25 extension specialists at land-grant institutions across the U.S. And we do three primary things together. We conduct coordinated research across the U.S. annually that drives best management practices, and I'll talk about some of that research today. We leverage our local knowledge to have national extension impact. So for example, one of the things that our group did pretty recently was work with the Risk Management Agency to get the replant coverage dates adjusted for soybeans across the U.S. And on average, that resulted in a 5-day earlier replant coverage date in each state. And that was not based on research we did in a coordinated way, but it was based on us working in a coordinated fashion with RMA to get that done. And finally, we amplify the impact of data-driven, research-based information. So I'll talk for most of this about our coordinated research efforts. And the first trial that I'd like to talk about this morning is in regards to foliar fertilizer use. So when I started as the extension specialist at NC State about 6 years ago, I was getting a lot of questions about the value of foliar fertilizers applied with a fungicide or insecticide in early reproductive development. And instead of putting some research trials out in North Carolina at 3 or 4 sites on this, we deployed this as a national trial capturing many different sites across the U.S. And I think that allows, in certain circumstances, us to make better recommendations. And this project was led by Emma Matcham, who was a graduate student at the time at UW-Madison, has been an extension specialist at the University of Florida for a couple years, and is actually going to Ohio State within the next few months. But Emma led this project. And so just want to do a brief, what are foliar fertilizers, as we think about the inputs that we might be able to skip when there's low commodity prices or there's no data to support why you'd use them under certain circumstances. So foliar fertilizers are dry or liquid products that are mixed with water and sprayed over living plant tissues. They often contain a mixture of macro and micronutrients, but not always. There's some that are micronutrient packages only, and generally they're applying pretty small amounts of plant nutrients through this mechanism. So one of the things we always want to emphasize is that these products are not a substitute for soil applied nutrient applications for nutrients that we know are important, like P and K. And foliar products enter the plants without touching the soil, which could be helpful under certain conditions. Like in North Carolina, an issue we have is we'll see manganese deficiency where there's high pH. And often that's after some type of animal nutrient application, or we've got poultry ash that some growers are applying to fields. Drive up the pH. You can use foliar products in those circumstances to remedy an issue you might encounter. And generally they're mixed with water, applied through a sprayer, and again, generally supplying pretty low application rates of different nutrients. So knowing there's a lot of interest in this area, we did research at 46 sites here across the state in 16 states over 2 years, looking at the value of foliar fertilizer products and their impact on yield and ultimately ROI when they were applied at R3, which is beginning pod, and a common timing when insecticide and fungicide applications are made. And there was a research team from all over the US working on this. We looked at a variety of foliar fertilizer products. I'm just going to be the first to acknowledge there's no way we can comprehensively evaluate everything that's available. There's too many. There's too much turnover in the marketplace. So what we did was at the Commodity Classic meeting, we worked with growers that sat on our state boards, and we walked across the trade show floor trying to figure out what are some of the foliar fertilizer products that are most frequently used in U.S. soybean production, and we came up with this list. You can see here in this table the nutrients that are applied in each product and how many pounds per acre of each nutrient is applied, and you'll note, especially for some of the macronutrients like NPK, the level of nutrient that's applied is very minimal compared to what the plant needs from a macronutrient perspective. But nonetheless, these are the products that we evaluated in all these 50 sites across the US. And what we found was that solid black line in the middle of those boxes there is the average of each treatment compared to the untreated control. The control is the first thing on the x-axis. And what we found was that these foliar fertilizer products did not impact soybean yield in all these diverse environments across the United States. So we're capturing a lot of weather variability and a lot of yield variability, and they did not have an impact on soybean yield. On average, if you looked at these products and their prices, knowing that there was no impact on yield or ROI, that could save growers on average $13 per acre if you looked at these products. And if you applied that on 500 acres of soy, that would be a semester of college at your land grant institution for your child or your grandchild. So I was asked to talk about where money could be saved in these times of low commodity prices. This is an area where we have no data-driven information in many sites across the US to show that applying foliar fertilizers impact yield when you don't see visual nutrient deficiency symptoms. I will note, we weren't doing this research in areas where we saw evident issues out in the field. I'll also say this was only done at application timings of R3, which was again driven by when common pesticide applications are made and growers are thinking about adding something additional to the tank. I have an extension publication at the tables for you on this, where you can get all of the additional details on this trial, should you be interested in learning more. So I liked how Abigail's presentation was more dynamic, so we're going to cover a lot of ground this morning. So any questions on this specific trial? Okay, hopefully the point was clear. The next area that our group has been doing research on is biological seed treatments. Another area where there's a huge volume of products that are available to producers, and in an area, this kind of just shows the biological landscape and how complex it is with different companies involved and different products and types of products. You've got inoculants, biofertilizers, biostimulants, growth regulators. You can read them up there. There's a lot of classes of biologicals and a lot of companies that are selling these products. But as land-grant institutions, part of our role is to be able to evaluate products in an unbiased way. So we try to be strategic about the fact that our growers wanted more data-driven information on this, and we needed to figure out how to narrow this list of products. And so we tried to get products that represented some of the major categories of things that biologicals claim to help with. So you could have N fixation, increased phosphorus uptake, improved nutrient use efficiency, stimulated root growth, expanded root absorption, and implications for pest management, which in my opinion is one of the most promising areas where these biologicals might fit. So we did research on this over 2 years. Now we've got about 100 sites, a little bit over 100 sites of data. You'll see that Illinois participated in these biological seed treatment trials, which was great. I think Emerson, you ran these trials, right? Okay, so Emerson for the first year, then it was Giovanni, but all hard questions can go to Emerson on this. Nonetheless, we did this research many sites across the U.S. We looked at a variety of different products, and we're not going to talk specifically here about what the individual products were, but here's the classes of biologicals that they represented there. And you can see there's a lot of different active ingredients up there. Again, we were trying to target products that represented a range of things that biological seed treatments claim to do. And again, if you look at these box plots and those red dots, those were the averages of all these treatments we compared to the untreated control. So these products in many different sites across the U.S. had no impact on soybean yield in the first year we did this research, 50 sites. We always do our research for multiple years. And so we did research again in 52 locations the following year across 20 states. Looked at an evolving list of biological seed treatments, or I should say an expanded list. And we saw, again, very similar results where there was minimal impact of these biological seed treatments on yield. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that the reason that we do this research across so many sites is actually because we're trying to look for the circumstances where these types of products will impact yield. And so the graduate student that's involved in this project right now is kind of driving down into taking those sites across the U.S., breaking them into clusters to see where biological seed treatments might have more of an impact. And those clusters are defined by things like weather patterns, soil types. And so in this data set, what will likely emerge is that there might be circumstances based on your agronomic and weather and soil type factors where these products are more likely to have an impact. But when you looked at the data set over the past couple of years at a high level, there weren't any areas that emerged as spots where we were likely to see an impact unless there was an issue previously identified. So in the conclusion here, we are, as land-grant institutions, trying to evaluate a plethora of products to provide data-driven information for you to make decisions. These products generally cost $3 to $5 per acre, and we are hoping to, again, expand this data set and try to make more specific recommendations about where these products might have an impact, but on the macro level, little impact on yield from our preliminary research at many sites across the U.S. All right, another topic that we are generating some data-driven decisions about is on late season desiccation. So is anybody in here interested in desiccating their soybeans?
We do get questions on it every once in a while.
Okay, Stephanie said you do get some questions. Not something that's commonly done in the Midwest.
One of our board members does.
Okay, one of the board members does though. Is that in Southern Illinois?
No.
Northern Illinois, okay. So I will say the reason that we're interested in doing this research is because we have a national network of folks doing research, and while this is a very common production practice in the Mid-South, and it's starting to be more common in the Southeast, our colleagues in the Midwest indicate they're getting a lot more questions on this. And as weather patterns shift, the things that drive the need for desiccation in the South could be things that you encounter here in 10 years, and it'd be good to have data-driven information on how to manage this situation. So why would you desiccate? Is the board member that desiccates in Northern Illinois here today? All right, so anybody else that might have an interest, why would you desiccate your beans?
There was some short-lived interest in desiccation for cover crop establishment, so I don't know if you want to touch on any effect as you go through this that might have for cover crops. And we also do see it in seed corn fields for cover crop establishment. So I don't know if you can touch on positive or negative effects that what we're actually using might be good or bad for cover crops.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, surely one of the reasons we're desiccating in the South and Southeast is to get beans out of the field more quickly. Often that's to protect seed quality or capitalize on a price premium for early delivery, but surely it can also have other benefits like facilitating other fall management practices. So that's one potential reason. From what I hear from our colleagues at Minnesota, Wisconsin, one of the reasons that there's this increased interest in desiccation is because it can homogenize maturity when you have variability in green material throughout the field. Potentially, terminate weeds at harvest. That's one of the classical reasons for desiccation. Improve harvest efficiency. For us in the South, a big issue is the mitigation of seed quality decline. So when our beans are coming into physiological maturity, it's often very wet, like right now, and very hot. And that can drive some pretty major seed quality issues. If you can accelerate maturity and get the beans out of the field faster, often it can help with that. Can it impact green stem? How many of y'all have challenges with green stem? Stephanie's whispering to me a lot. There's definitely mixed views on this, but I've seen it. If you get the desiccation on early enough, it will have an impact. It can't resolve the issue if it's already presented itself in the field, but there is some interaction there. So there's a variety of reasons that growers might desiccate their beans. One of them, again, being to mitigate these seed quality issues. So I hope that you don't see this very often in Illinois. But unfortunately, in wet falls, we see these seed quality issues pretty frequently in the South. And what happens is that high moisture and high heat are driving disease development in the beans, and we can see things like phomopsis, seed decay, purple seed stain, a lot of other issues. and we'll desiccate beans to try to prevent some of this. So when our growers take their beans to the elevator, I'm guessing similar here, but they'll be graded out. The damaged beans are taken out, the beans with purple seed stain are taken out. And sometimes when these seed quality issues are bad enough, we'll see quite a bit of dockage because of that, and desiccation can allow the beans to get out of the field faster where they're less prone to this heat and moisture that are driving some of these seed quality issues. We've done a lot of research in North Carolina over the past few years on how mid-season pest management influences some of these seed quality issues. I'm talking like fungicides and insecticides applied at mid-reproductive development. And if you look at this data here, pesticide management strategies on the x-axis. So we looked at fungicides alone, insecticides alone, 2 shots of fungicides and 2 shots of fungicides and insecticides, compared them to the non-treated control for their impact on seed quality. We also looked at yield, but right now I'm talking about seed quality. And we looked at the percentage in the red bars is damage, in the blue bars is purple seed stain. And what we found was that even aggressive levels of mid-season pest management do not impact seed damage. We compared these 300 times, these treatments. So across 6 sites, many planting dates, many maturity groups. You see all those A's on the red bars, that means those pest management strategies had no impact on seed quality. If you look at the blue bars, that's purple seed stain, which how often do you see that here? Do you ever see purple seed stain?
Every once in a while, certain seasons we get it. We had it several years ago. It just depends on the season.
Okay, so it's something we'll see more commonly, and 2 shots of fungicide did drop purple seed stain levels, but only by 1%, which is really not practically significant at the elevator. So my point of this is you cannot manage seed quality issues through aggressive mid-season pest management. Now, these pest management strategies affect yield. In our environment, often 2 applications of fungicides will increase soybean yield in North Carolina because of our disease complex. But it won't mitigate seed quality issues, so we have to try to manage this through another mechanism, desiccation being one of the potential options for doing so. Green stem is another thing we encountered that I mentioned. We see it somewhat frequently in North Carolina when we're using earlier maturing varieties. So for us, that's like a 4 and an early 5, and we're planting before mid-May. And the Science for Success team has developed some research-based information on green stem. If you'd like to look into that, there's the QR code. But my point in highlighting green stem is it's just another reason that's driving this interest in desiccation. I did want to add a couple slides from our colleague at Mississippi State University. I would say that our colleagues in the Mid-South are the leading researchers on this, where there's a lot of soybean desiccation going on. And if you look at the different products that are available, you could use Sharpen, Paraquat, Deepful 5. And they've compared these products for their efficacy and desiccation over time. The darker green bars are desiccation at 3 days after treatment. The light green bars are desiccation 7 days after treatment. So you can see at 7 days after treatment, these different desiccation products perform similarly for desiccation. Whereas if you're trying to really accelerate harvest, a few days after desiccation, there are some treatment differences, and there's also some label limitations for harvest following some of these desiccation products that you should be aware of. But that's some data out of the Mid-South. And in the Mid-South, the recommendation for desiccating beans is that you can do it as early as R6.5. So does anybody know what that is?
When the membrane separates from the seed.
Bingo. So R6 is full seed, R6.5 full seed in the pods in the upper 4 nodes of the plant. When the white membrane that's connecting that full seed to the pod is separated, But the optimal time to desiccate is not the same across all the United States. We have a lot of variability in soybean growth habit. So this is the reason that we're doing some research on this in Science for Success that we've just started. And I want to note that Illinois is part of this research where we're looking at the impact of desiccation on soybean quality and yield all across the United States. I recognize in Illinois it's not a production practice that's common or maybe even driving a lot of questions today, but it might be in 5 years, 10 years, and we definitely have lots of questions about it now in our environment in the South, so that's why we're doing this research, to be proactive for the North, to be answering current questions for the South. We're looking at multiple planting dates, multiple maturity groups, multiple timings, and multiple products so that you will have the data-driven information you need to make decisions about desiccation in the coming years. So those were 3 examples, or 4 examples of areas that we're doing research as a network of land-grant institutions to try to provide you data-driven information to make decisions. That is one of the areas that Science for Success works in, as mentioned earlier. Another area that we try to be impactful in is there's a lot of state-level research that's supported for Science for Success researchers all across the United States. And there's a lot of information that's been gained over time as a part of that research. Emerson would be a big example of this. I think we added up all the years that all these Science for Success team members have been working on soybeans, and it was over like 150 years. People like Emerson really help us boost that number, I'm just saying. But there's a lot of local knowledge that can be leveraged as a result of that. So one of the things that our team somewhat recently did was we looked at the whole soybean growth cycle and identified some areas for risk management and misconceptions. And because the beans are in this stage now, I'm gonna talk about some misconceptions at pod and seed set, but all of this information was gleaned using information that we have generated locally over the years. So when we're thinking about pod set, which I'm sure you're well into up here, except maybe on your double crop beans, we're looking at the number of pods per acre that sets the maximum number of seeds per acre. So pod development is one of the most critical stages, and stress will cause aborted pods, but seed number and pod and seed size can compensate for that. So I think that's one of the important things to note here. So in this publication, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I would highlight that you look at this as an area to get research-based information. There's a lot of misconceptions across these growth stages that are highlighted. And Emerson, what team were you on for this publication? Oh, yeah, if Emerson was on this, you know this is rock solid on pod set. So some of the misconceptions that were highlighted. The soybean plant needs to retain most of its pods to maximize yield. That's a misconception. Pods will abort naturally, and the plant has this ability to compensate through number of seeds per pod and seed size. Presence of 4 to 5 bean pods is required for high yields. That's a misconception. Pod number and seed size affect yield more than seeds per pod. Light needs to penetrate the whole canopy. That's a misconception. Complete canopy closure by this stage is important to capture all available sunlight, retain soil moisture, and reduce weed competition. And there are some other things here that were highlighted, like making a sprayer trip across the field at this stage would either be neutral or positive, but there's a lot of research-based information to show there's yield implications from moving a sprayer across the field at this stage if it hadn't been there before. We just discussed the foliar fertilizer data, assuming that prophylactic foliar fertilizer applications are going to increase soybean yield is a misconception. Hopefully you've seen the data to convince you of that now. And also our colleagues have done some research on the impact of late season nitrogen management and its role in increasing soybean yield, and they found that in much research across the US, that's not the case. So this is, I think, an example of lots of this research is driven out of certain states or maybe the North Central Research Program, but you can find it all in a concise area that helps distill misconceptions of soybean production all across the nation. Seed set, you know, there's like 5 sections of growth stages in that document. The seed set stage was led by Seth Nave, who I know has done Illinois soybean events recently. Seth is, I would say, the US expert on the agronomy side and seed quality, protein, oil implications. And to maximize yield at seed set, soybeans require perfect environmental conditions without stress from pests throughout seed filling to maximize yield. There are important management considerations like protecting leaf area and minimizing stress. And there's also some common misconceptions that are associated with seed set, like applying a product to reduce drought stress during seed set will result in greater yields. Our colleagues have done research on this. There's no data-driven information to support that. There's also a similar comment related to flooding. And finally, many of us still get questions about applying sugar to soybeans at this stage. And there's been research done in many sites to distill that that's not the case. So I think this is an example of how we can leverage our local knowledge, put it in a document that has best management practice recommendations and implications for soybean production across the US. And the final thing that I'll highlight that our group does is we really try to amplify the reach of checkoff supported information. And I'll give you a couple examples of that here. One of the things Science for Success does is we develop fact sheets on a variety of topics. I highlighted this one since Abigail's presentation focused some on cover crops earlier, but we have some information on cover crop management for soybeans prior to soybeans. And I think that's an important one to highlight because in North Carolina, our growers are using cover crops often because we have to. It's not because we are necessarily worried about the soil health implications. It's because we can't manage Palmer amaranth or we can't manage nematodes. And so we have more aggressive cover crop management, and hopefully people can learn from that. We do other things. I see this is a dynamic PowerPoint. I wasn't, our communications team is well beyond me, I guess. Here we go. This is what we have a webinar series where we highlight a variety of different topics. And Stephanie does a nice job helping promote some of these things, so hopefully you can plug in. We do extension articles like the one that just highlighted about these risks and misconceptions across the soybean growth stages. And one thing I'd really like to highlight today.
Hello, my name is Sean Godley. I'm out here for Science for Success, talking about flooded soybean issues we've seen across the Midwest. This past year, in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, we've seen extreme flooding events across the entire soybean growing region. And this last week, we've seen a report coming out that over 12 million acres of soybean yet to be planted. Behind me, you can see some flooded soybean, and there's 2 different types of flooding that we're dealing with. One is complete flooding, which would be submerged, and the other is waterlogging. In this event behind us, you can see it's completely submerged. And at this growth stage we're sitting at out here, basically is R1 soybean, we can have about 50% yield loss just due to the soybeans being submerged at this growth stage. What can happen is we have a reduction in biomass, a reduction in root growth, photosynthesis, and also a reduction in the amount of nitrogen fixed through nitrogen fixation. So stay tuned for more updates as we look at ways to alleviate the stress across the Midwest.
So we try to do updates from the field across the US, and our goal in doing that is we're all encountering different challenges throughout the growing season, and hopefully there's an opportunity to learn from one another about what challenges are being encountered. And so we've been doing that for the past couple of years, just getting quick videos out in the field highlighting what's going on. But we're also ramping up our ability to provide those types of updates through a new initiative called Better Together, where we're working with multiple collaborative groups within the soybean checkoff space alongside state-level soybean boards to try to amplify the impact of this collaborative research. And one of the things that we launched this year is called bean binoculars. Is anybody following along with bean binoculars? I have a little card at your table. If you flip it over, you can get the QR code that will take you to bean binoculars. Somebody told me that these look like handcuffs earlier, not bean binoculars. So Illinois might drive evolution of our logo. But nonetheless, this tool is a map that's dynamic, trying to showcase soybean issues as they emerge across the U.S. And I think the couple really important points of this map is that with each issue, it elevates data-driven, research-based information on how you might resolve that issue. And also it's dynamic. They pop up there as things arise. And so if you're a grower in Illinois, you might be able to see some of the other things that are popping up in Illinois, or you might be able to look at what's going on in Arkansas, which you might not have a problem with this year, but could in a couple of years, and have those types of things on your radar. So the QR code's on the back of that little tag at your table, but let me just show you kind of what bean binoculars does. And we just launched this a few weeks ago, so I would say it's young, but you can find it on the Crop Protection Network website. And what we've got is we've got this map, and it'll be showcasing soybean issues as they're popping up across the U.S. And so here you can see we're zoning in here on North Carolina and Virginia now to see what some of the common issues are. And it also, in addition to the map, catalogs those issues into a library. So if you are a new crop consultant, or you're a new student on campus, or you're a new farmer, or you just want to see what's going on in the library, you have quick access to high quality photos and research-based information associated with these issues. For example, here I pulled just a couple of these that I thought were interesting. Here's a manganese deficiency issue. I mentioned that earlier actually when I was talking about high pH. If our growers saw this, they could apply foliar manganese and remedy the issue pretty quickly. So it's just a concise way to say, oh, what does that look like? And what are the research-based information that can help resolve that issue? Another example is slug damage. How many of y'all have concerns with slugs? I'll say when we talk about cover crops, when I talk to Midwestern growers, their interaction with slugs is one of the biggest concerns. And so we've got some pictures here of slug damaged beans following cover crops, and people can plug in, look at these high quality photos, look at the associated resources and see what kind of things are going on. Here's a sudden death syndrome. I threw this up because it came in from Iowa, but could be an early alert system about what's going on in your region or across the U.S. So wanted to highlight that resource in an effort to amplify research-based information. This is an example of how we are working to do that. So let me try that again. Third time's a charm, maybe. Okay, in conclusion, we are Science for Success. That didn't work at the USB meeting either, so I might have to give it up. And we support U.S. soybean farmers through coordinated research. So that coordinated research I highlighted this morning was on foliar fertilizer applications, biological seed treatments, and the desiccation research we have going on. We have other research projects going on as well. Some are related to the sustainability score of soybeans that Abigail mentioned earlier, among others. We leverage our local knowledge to have national extension impact. That misconceptions across soybean growth stage publication is an example of that. And finally, we amplify research-based information. And so bean binoculars, hopefully you'll check it out and follow along. would be an example in that space. If you want to learn more, our website right now is the Soybean Research and Information Network website. We will get our own website soon, but for now you can find us there on YouTube, on X. And with that, I know we covered some ground, but I would love to take comments or questions or ideas that you have for our group.